Stefaniuk at the end of the table here, our Director of Finance. She's going to be filling in some of the reports on the finance. So I think on that note, and having welcomed you all, I'm going to ask Brita Chell, the Chair of the Winnipeg Airport's Board of Directors, to bring some greetings and her perspectives. Brita. I should say we're going to be following protocols, not just your distancing, but because while I'm here and I want you to be able to see what I'm saying, particularly for those online, we're going to be having Ethel come on, hi, and just do a quick spray in accordance with our provincial protocols. Thanks.
Thank you, Barry, and good morning, everyone. I am Brita Chell. I'm the chair of the WAA board, and this is my first year as chair and my 5th year serving on the board. As Barry said, it's been a very difficult time in the industry and an interesting moment in the company's history to assume the role of board chair, especially after many years of steady growth exceeding our forecasts. That being said, the WAA team, including board and all staff members, are rising to the occasion, responding to the crisis with an unwavering commitment and a strong sense of urgency and integrity, while at the same time upholding our values. We are working together to ensure a sustainable Winnipeg-Richardson International Airport and safeguard its ability to serve the community in the long term. I am honored to be part of the group that is setting the direction for the airport today and to help ensure its success into the future. The board plays a critical role in guiding the direction of the company and making decisions to support the viability of the airport. The WAA board outlines our business priorities, which steer WAA to new heights each year by relying on the subsidiaries to execute on their plans. And this was certainly the case in 2019, as our unique business model allowed us to accomplish new goals and further our growth impact for the company. As we reflect on the previous year, I wish to thank outgoing board chair Tom Payne for his leadership and commitment and dedication over the last 5 years. All of his contributions to the organization have been tremendous, and we want to thank him for his service. Many of our board members are here today, and I would just like to take an opportunity to ask our board members just to stand and be acknowledged. Board members? Thank you. We also have one board member that I believe is virtual, so hello to you as well. I'd also like to acknowledge our Chair Emeritus, Arthur Morrow, who is not able to join us today. The board is a reflection of our community and is nominated by the City of Winnipeg, Economic Development Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce, the Assiniboine Chamber of Commerce, the RM of Rosser, the Government of Canada, and the Province of Manitoba. As well, there are 4 members that are named from the community at large. To help our deliberations, the board has 3 committees. The board operates as a collective, a committee of the whole in setting the direction and making decisions, and the committees bring forward thoughtfully thought out recommendations for the board's consideration. In addition to the functions of the board, we also have established a community consultative committee. Its purpose is to provide a venue for effective dialogue as well as distribution of information on various matters. And this committee is currently comprised of leaders from the community representing business, tourism, the Indigenous community, and government. Years ago, we also established the Environmental Advisory Committee, and this is a group of community members that meet regularly throughout the year to discuss environmental issues as they relate to airport operations. During this challenging period, our business priorities have become increasingly important. In 2019, the Board of Directors held its strategic planning session where we take a look at where the industry is going and how best to position WAA. The board reaffirmed its 3 core principles of leadership, innovation, and diversification. Even amid COVID, these priorities are top of mind and the roadmap that drive us forward. For leadership, it's about unlocking the potential to drive economic growth for our region. For innovation, it's us becoming an innovation hub, trialing new technologies to meet shifting demands in the industry. And for diversification, it's about looking beyond the airport. How do we deliver service and generate revenue? The board had set these priorities long before the recent events happened, but they continue to be relevant today, and I would probably argue they're even more relevant today as we work through this unprecedented territory. The continued commitment of everyone and a resolve to work together towards a common goal will see us deliver on these priorities this year and in the years to come. And with that, I would like to invite Nicole Stefaniuk, WAA's Director of Finance, to talk about how we did financially in 2019. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to provide you with an update on the 2019 Winnipeg Airport Authority financials. First, I'd like to start by talking about where WAA's revenue comes from. Canada's aviation system is a 100% user pay model. So if you looked at a similar pie chart for a US airport, you would see a big slice for government funding from the FAA. Here, airport authorities are expected to generate their own revenue, and there's a few ways in which we do this. Our biggest single source of funds comes from airport improvement fees, or AIF. This is 35% of our revenue, and it's shown as the dark blue segment on the top right of the diagram. This is the fee you pay on your ticket each time you fly out of the terminal. The AIF is collected by the airlines at the time of purchase, and it is remit to the airport, less a 6% administration fee. Each airport sets its own fee, and this is used for critical infrastructure improvements, including servicing the debt on the terminal building. The AIF cannot be used for operating costs. AIF is followed closely by our aeronautical revenue. So that's the red and the green slice of the pie, which together amount to 35%. These are the fees charged to the airlines to use the passenger terminal and for landing fees and other airfield services. All other pieces of the pie add up to 30%. The largest chunk of these is ground-side revenue, which is generated from our parking products as well as ground transportation fees. And every time you come to the terminal and you buy a coffee, lunch, or a piece of luggage, it's captured in our concession revenue, which, as you can see, is a small contributor at just 3%. The remaining revenue comes from leases, the fees we receive for managing other airports, and miscellaneous sources. On the expense side, personnel costs and services and repairs are the largest cost drivers at about 32% each. Services and repairs include all the contracted services to operate the airport, such as security or cleaning costs. And personnel costs is for our employees at the various locations, including here in Winnipeg and up in Iqaluit. Ground lease rent, or you could call it a tax, is our third highest expense at 13%. In 2019, the WAA paid the Government of Canada $9.7 million in rent to operate this airport. Supplies are also a significant operating expense. This includes everything from fuel costs for the mobile equipment, as well as the chemicals used on the airfield in the winter. So needless to say, these costs can fluctuate year to year depending on the weather. Utilities, property tax, and insurance make up the rest of our expenses. And note that we pay property tax to both the City of Winnipeg as well as the RM of Rosser. So year over year, we've managed to keep consistent. Revenues increased slightly, as did expenses. 2019 was a year of really just inflationary increases, as passenger traffic was almost identical to 2018, as carriers were impacted by external factors, such as the grounding of the 737 MAX. An important metric that we track is EBITDA, so earnings before interest and depreciation, as a percentage of total revenue. As you can see from this 5-year trend line, the percent has been fairly consistent. EBITDA is needed at this level in order for WAA to cover its principal and interest payments on the debt, as well as to generate sufficient cash flow to fund capital asset purchases. Overall, WAA has been prudently managing its resources to ensure that we have sufficient liquidity on hand to cover our debt requirements. You can see here that at the end of 2019, we had $140 million in available cash or credit. These resources were also meant for capital infrastructure improvements, such as runways, or for new infrastructure improvements, such as the ground services building, which just opened next to the terminal. Our debt service coverage ratio in the trust covers WA's debt, and it needs to be set above 1. As you can see here, in 2019, we had more than sufficient resources. So we ended 2019 in a strong financial position by focusing on generating revenue and keeping our expenses in check. With that, I will turn it back to Barry to share some additional highlights from 2019. Thank you.
There we go. Thanks, Nicole. I guess would that we could end the story with the story of 2019. But we'll continue on. For those of you that know me, and I know for some of you, you've probably almost tired of hearing it, I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek's the individual that wrote the book, It Starts With Why. It's not that I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek, but for me, it's that he managed to capture what is millennia of thinking around the principles about what's important. I know that one of the things that struck me the most was when he said, you know, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And that has become really obvious, at least to me, as we have been particularly going through this. Our why is that we're here to serve. We're here to serve this community, and we're determined to live our mission statement, which starts with probably the 3 most important words of the mission statement. I forgot I can do this. Starts with the 3 most important words of the mission statement, which are with our community. We do all of that under the umbrella of our values. Always maintaining respect, integrity, and service excellence. That's our why. That's what guided us to the results that you just saw, that Nicole just shared with you. It is what's guiding us as we continue to deal with our current reality. As I said at the outset, almost nobody asks me anymore about 2019. I'm sure that when you think about 2019, there are some things that you'll recall. So let's just go over a few of them. 2019 started off with a bang. January through March was incredible. Come to think of it, so was 2020. But March was incredible. And then we had this story start to break. And it was the demise, or I guess the grounding, of the 737 MAX. And that started to take a lot of the potential capacity for growth out of the marketplace. It was, I guess it particularly impacted the third and fourth quarters. And what was interesting to me, at least, was that demand remained really strong. So what we saw was a very strong demand, but a decline in the available capacity. 2019 also saw the introduction of the Passenger Bill of Rights. And it was probably time for a Bill of Rights similar to that, similar to what we see in many other countries. The rules, however, did further challenge the industry just a little bit as they found ways to try and stay competitive while meeting the new regulatory requirements. My own personal perspective is that along with the benefits of what the Passenger Bill of Rights has brought to Canadian consumers, is that there's another victim of this new order, and I hope it passes quickly, and that's that it's set up a structure now where people, whether you're an airport, an airline, or anybody along the supply chain, is looking to ensure that you're not the one to blame. Where in the past what we saw was a great working together to make sure the customer got that lost luggage. It's now set up a bit of a rights and blame sort of structure in the background. I'm hoping that that's just something that's a passing sort of phenomena in the industry. The federal budget came along, and it also put in motion, what you see up here is what we've been referring to as CATSA 2.0. We've been lobbying along with virtually every other partner in the supply chain for improvements in the processes of the security screening. Some of it we believed was fundamental, so we weren't surprised by this coming out. We were surprised perhaps a little bit by the timing. The interesting thing with this is this came out just as COVID-19 was starting to hit. And so the jury's a little bit out right now as to where this one's going to end up. A number of us have been working, I say us, I'm talking about airport CEOs now across the country, on what's the governance structure, what does this look like? And a lot of that's kind of been put a little bit on hold at the moment. 2019 also started with a path of consolidation. We saw WestJet going private. We saw Air Canada looking to acquire Air Transat. And of course, in Northern Canada, we saw Canadian North and First Air merging. Even without the pandemic, this consolidation was starting to occur. It's really kind of a normal part of the life cycle of airlines, the life cycle of aviation, actually, where there's that sort of coming around. We're in the maturity phase right now, or we were at the end of 2019, where we started to see this sort of consolidation, and then what that means. I guess what it means is a sort of a euphemism that the competitive landscape becomes more clear, is probably a way to put it. This is an issue we continue to follow closely, as we have over the past few years, because Winnipeg, in the previous phases of the industry life cycle, has very much benefited from the competitive landscape. New carriers adding new routes to new services that really spurred competition. And with, I'll say particularly Flare and Swoop on the horizon last year, helped spur some of the traffic growth that we had been seeing. In fact, I would argue that what we saw at the last part of the year wouldn't even have been as strong had they not been in the marketplace. Another reason we follow this is because as carriers consolidate, and particularly as you have legacy carriers with hub and spoke strategies, I'm not blaming them, that's actually fundamental to their existence. But it has a disproportionate effect on what happens in a market like Winnipeg, where we're not the Toronto or the Vancouver hubs that you see. 2019 also saw us, unfortunately in some respects, having to take action to preserve and ensure that we were able to continue offering a 24-hour airport. That connectivity that we believe this community needs, and what has really led and sustained much of the cargo development that we've been having here over the last 10 years. In September, we presented to Council, and we started to advocate at that time for a complete and a fulsome review of the AVPA. So part of that, and in fact at the November board meeting, November council meeting, was clearly articulated as our perspective being that development is clearly important, and we're a huge supporter of development as close to the airport as can be, but we also want to ensure that it's done on a planned basis, and that the 24-hour nature of the airport had to be somehow maintained. We were starting to hear even feedback from some of the cargo carriers that, well, if those kind of developments just pop up and we can't be guaranteed 24-hour access over the next 20 years, why would we invest in Winnipeg? So we felt it important to take on that particular issue and to advocate for a fulsome review. I should probably thank the provincial government at this stage, because they have stepped forward and announced that they're going to lead that review. They've asked us to partner with them, and we will continue to work with them to deliver on that balance of being able to provide new growth as well as assure the 24-hour nature of the airport. So despite the challenges and uncertainties that I just talked about, which today almost seem, I'll say, first world problems, we continued to drive efforts to improve the community's connectivity. Our passenger totals, as Nicole said, were pretty close to 2019, virtually identical to 2019. Prior to the MAX 8 grounding, that was on a much better trajectory, but still a really good year to end up with levels that matched 2018, which 2018 in and of itself was the record year for travel in and out of Manitoba. The passenger totals, I believe, and the strength of what we were seeing the first 3 months of 2019 really was due in part to some of the work that had been done by our tourism partners, Travel Manitoba, Tourism Winnipeg, because for the first time in a long time, Manitoba was actually a desired destination. Here you can see, next one, I guess. Here you can see where the 4.5 million passengers actually went to over the course of 2019. That's the breakdown. Our team spends a lot of time looking and analyzing all of the data and the numbers available to us, and they found some really good ways to be able to use our systems to provide data to the carriers that helps them understand and really gives us the most compelling case possible to present to airlines as they look to serve this region. And it has worked. It helped drive very strong numbers. We added 2 new direct routes last year, and we added capacity to 5 of the existing nonstop routes. I spoke earlier of our vision to be leaders in transportation, innovation, and growth. 2019, we put this into action, and we started trialing some of the things that you see up on the screen here. It's the next generation of ideas, things that are going to allow us to do some really interesting things going forward. Down on the lower left is a company we've been working with, Wheel, W-H-I-L-L. That is the first of the personal mobility devices. I think this is important because it allows people to be completely independent. In fact, they're testing it here this week. I don't see it out here right now, but they're testing it here this week again. Hopefully they'll be done by Thursday, and then it'd be ready for the next phase. And it allows someone from curb all the way to gate to be completely independent in their ability to travel. I think it's a great innovation. There's some other ones. You can see the one on the right here is a company we worked with, IRA, and that's a company that allows people with reduced vision to be able to work their way through the terminal by using their iPhone. And as you can see, he's got his iPhone up there pointing at the screen. Although he can't see the screen, the person that's talking on his phone into his ear is telling him a little to the right, a little to the left, and he checks in. And he's able to do and go through the entire process, including as he's walking towards the gate. If there's a stanchion in front of him or something like that, the individual is talking to him and telling him, nope, go to the right, there's a stanchion there. And it's another innovation that allows people to transit through the facility unaided. This is, we believe, important because we're told that by 2038, I believe it is, that 1 in 3 people transiting through the airport here are likely going to need some form of assistance. And as we're able to provide services like this, these are true innovations. These are ones that I can say we're firsts in. I think we're positioned well. The other one's a little more operational. That's the one up in the top right. And that's our autonomous snowplow. It needs another year of testing, but you can see it operating up there in some of last year's weather. I think there's some real potential for export. This is a partnership that was done. It's a completely made in Manitoba thing between North Star Robotics and ATI, company out of Portage la Prairie. I hope that it's able to live up to what we're seeing in the tests in sort of the real world. Innovative ideas like this come through collaboration. They come as a result of people and organizations working together. Innovations also come in other areas, and that's people coming together as we were able to do here. We sponsored in 2019 the first ever CAPA Canadian Aviation Summit. I'm pleased that much of what was brought out, talked about, and discussed at this summit is actually now being talked about and implemented in policies, not just in Canada, but in other countries as well. It was a huge success, brought people, thought leaders from our industry, from around the world, to Winnipeg for a couple of days here. I was going to make a comment about a thought leader sitting on the right-hand side of the couch there, but give him a private jab later. Incredibly valuable, rather, and I think a huge factor in putting us on the map. And speaking of connections don't happen without runways. And we obviously value those 2 strips of concrete a lot. This particular picture is some of the work that we've done. We did this past summer. This is a $24 million project, just assuring that the runways we have are in the shape they need to be to assure this community's connectivity. That particular shot is actually from the threshold of 13 of our two existing runways. A very large infrastructure project, capably, I'll say, delivered by our team. Because we're able to put those kinds of things and maintain those pieces of infrastructure effectively, we were able to continue to drive economic growth within the region, and I would say really established ourselves as a leader on the cargo side, where we have been now for a while, a leader in terms of hub for cargo jet, where we have also a direct service with all the major US players to their hubs in the United States. We play a critical role in the supply chains that keep this community going. But it's more than just this community. Because we're a hub, we're able to then fan out to many others, including the provision of services that we were not previously able to provide into the Canada's north. Without air service, those communities simply could not exist. It was interesting last year, I was pleased for the first time ever, the federal government also recognized the critical role that Winnipeg plays in the supply chains. And they've worked with us and will be providing up to $30 million in infrastructure funding under the National Trade Corridor Fund for a specific cargo facility over on the east side over here. This facility will address many of the gaps that we have currently in the region. From our perspective, it will also be important because it will help repatriate jobs. Jobs that are today being performed in other communities, specifically on the cargo side, specifically Chicago, because we don't have or didn't have the kinds of facilities that are required for many of our importers and exporters. Nicole also mentioned our ground services equipment, which when you're leaving, just take a look at it. It's right behind us here. It's got the yellow numbered doors over there. That is a state-of-the-art 96,000 square foot facility that is just now in the process of welcoming its tenants. That facility will save a lot of money for the carriers operating here because just of distance and because of innovations in the security processes that are used in that building. It's a great addition to the carriers that are operating within our community. Enhancing the travel experience is always top of mind for our team, and we're currently transforming the area around Gate 10. Many of you have talked to me in the past about how that's just a bottleneck, it's a problem in that area, and it is. In fact, it was limiting the capacity of the terminal building at certain times of day. So we've put our attention to that, and we're ready now to open the new Sapphire Lounge and a larger, I'll say more accommodating Tim Hortons, and one that doesn't require you to line up in the middle of the walkway at Gate 10. So what you see up there, you can see it's still behind the hoarding if you look closely on the right-hand side of the picture. But it's up, ready to operate, and that's right down at Gate 12, the very far end of the terminal building on the departure side. I mentioned Mike and a little bit about Wasco was up to, and I want to come back to that. It's been fascinating because of our ability to leverage the skills and the skill sets that are inherent within the team here already to take on other airports and other tasks at the moment entirely within Canada. They've been able to go into many other airports, large and small, I'll say, and make meaningful differences in areas of operations, compliance, standards, safety management systems, and other technical service. This gives us a very broad reach and impact across Canada. Wasco now actually has those three airports in particular, two new ones that are on there for 2019. The Iqaluit Airport, which you've probably seen pictures of before, the top one, which is an incredible project. That was delivering a terminal building, in essence rebuilding the airport in Iqaluit, and now operating it over the next 30 years. And then we've just taken on the roles for Dawson Creek. This is a picture of the PAW, and I know you've probably seen some of the news media of the work that's now going on at Stephenville in Newfoundland. So why? I come back to that, because it's about our community. Everything that we're able to do that brings in revenue from other sources allows us to perform greater here in Winnipeg. It allows us to provide better services and allows us and helps us to remain competitive with others, particularly in this environment. Our team's quick to lend a hand, whether it's delivering hampers or some of the things that you see up on here. I know the team spent some time this last year in mentorship roles for the Girls in Aviation Day. It was a great success. The top left there, that's actually Vince Dancho throwing some vegetables from our harvest garden up into the truck to go over to Winnipeg Harvest. This is now 2019 was our 23rd year of providing primarily root vegetables to Winnipeg Harvest that allows them to feed many others in our community. That's an interesting one because that's entirely volunteer. Our team plants, weeds, tends the garden, looks after everything, including the harvest. We just did the harvest for this year's. It was onions, carrots this last week, and potatoes we'll be doing probably in the next week or so. We were also able in 2019 to endow our Winnipeg Airports Authority Queen Elizabeth II Scholarship. And the fellow that you see down on the left, standing proudly by the airplane he's now flying, is Liam Hay. He was one of the recipients. He's now flying for Fast Air here on the field. That's us investing in the next generation of aviation leaders. All our work at the airport continues to support and empower our regional economy. As you can see on the slide here, it's a little bit busy, but I'll just draw your attention to two numbers. One that we really take a look at is the 18,500 jobs. That's the number of jobs that this facility, the entire facility, not just the terminal building, is responsible for within our community. That's 18,500 people who rely on what we do here every day to put food on their table, to feed their families, to send them, to educate them, all that. That's an important part of what we do. That number doesn't always play up well in certain sectors, so other numbers do. This airport facility is responsible for $4.32 billion in economic output. It's a big number. It's also about $1 billion more than what it was 3 years ago. You can see also the tax totals up there. You can stick those into your memory banks for when you're talking to politicians if you want. But the federal government last year received $201 million from the operations that happen here at the airport. The provincial government was $79 million, and you can see there the municipal government, which is typically just property tax, is $7.5 million. What was important to us last year is every one of those numbers were up significantly. You can see the jobs. It's almost 1,200 jobs added in the 3 years between the last report and the 2019 report that we just did. We ended 2019, is what you heard from Nicole just a little while ago, in a very, very strong position. More people, more cargo, strong financials, and I would say an exciting future, something that we were really looking forward to in 2020. And then we started to see headlines like this. From the very early signs of what we just said, something's going on in China, which was in sort of the end of November, December of the previous year, we had already been tracking and trying to understand, and we're fortunate we have a very strong risk management process. We have a number of people that had been working with us or in other airports, in fact, during the SARS incident. So we had a fairly good understanding and a handle, we felt, on what the impact of a pandemic could be. We had a contingency plan in place with updates coming in from other regions around the world. When we started to experience the threat for real, and I mentioned to someone earlier, my mind went back to school and thinking about Maslow's hierarchical theory of needs, where 2019 looking to 2020, we'd been thinking about, I'll say, sort of self-actualization kinds of thoughts, to where we are today, which is really existential. And that's really looking to see and understand where we're able to continue to provide the services this community requires. As I said, March 2020 changed everything. Manitoba began to activate its own pandemic plan, which immediately then kicked in our own emergency services plan, which were the safety precautions, the In fact, we were sending all of our staff home that could. Clearly, the people that are, working in the building here, keeping the electrical and the plumbing on the airfield couldn't be working from home. But everyone that could work from home, we sent home March the 12th. It really was a month like no other because that's when we started seeing the flight cancellations. That's when we saw the borders close. The border, I shouldn't say technical close because it was restrictions that were put on. The federal government reminded me of that last week. They didn't close the border, they put on restrictions. But the atmosphere radically changed. Our approach to the pandemic from day one has been really around three things. It's understand, mitigate, sustain. And we continue to work that plan. In the earliest days, we were working to understand the potential impacts. As our understanding grew, we mapped out the steps that we felt would be required of us to mitigate and then to move to sustain. What we also found during this process is that it's not linear. It's kind of goes in a circle because there's always new information coming in. You always have to go back and understand, look to sustain, look to mitigate, and then add the steps towards sustainment. As we were going through all that, we looked very closely at our operations, areas and ways we could reduce cost. If any of you have traveled or been on the other side, you'll note that we have closed significant areas of the terminal building. So basically from gate 3 to 6 is completely closed, and we're now just using 7 to 12 down at the far end. We found ways in not just closing parts of the terminal, but in shutting down various components that were high on energy consumption, cycling lights, all those kinds of things. We also took action and canceled all of our external contracts. We had a number of people working with us under contract for various things. They were immediately sent home in mid-March. We worked diligently at the same time to ensure that everything that a traveler required in coming through our facility was in place. The safety protocols I mentioned, the signage that you saw when you came in, the signage throughout the facility. That, I guess, was paired with promoting the best possible prevention measures that we could inside the terminal building. Hand sanitizing. We were one of the first airports to go with the, I shouldn't say one of the first, we were one of the early airports to go with the requirement for masks in the facilities. We continue to raise awareness of the changes to the passenger experience, the increased safety and health protocols. The next thing we did is we paused virtually all capital. So we went from, Nicole helped me, it was 70 million in capital, 70-ish million in capital to under 7. And that 7 includes some things that are purely in there for the safety and the ongoing requirement for the operations of the airport. To protect the airport in the future, we continue following that plan. We're going back through and looking to find every way we possibly can to balance and maintain our community's connection with the outside. We have to balance that, obviously, within the availability of our cash and the current revenue environment. Our, what we branded as YWG Clean program, that team, I can tell you, is not slowing down. They continue to look for ways of innovating and ensuring that we're able to ensure that the travelers understand we have their back. We're looking for ways to instill confidence again in travel. We included some interesting things. Actually, there's one that it's not particularly obvious, but it's a UV system that's on the main escalator as you come down. It means that every cycle of that escalator handrail is completely sanitized. A good way of ensuring that people know that when they're using that, they can safely hold on to their handrail as they're coming down. I don't know about you, but I find myself these days, even in whether I'm in a mall or something, I'm just not touching things as much anymore. That's not necessarily safe. particularly on escalators. So that was a great innovation. I was glad to see that that one was something we were able to put in. So our protocols and initiatives are all based on the advice of healthcare professionals, the public health authorities for our community. The challenge, however, is that roughly 85%, just over, of our costs are fixed. We need to clean the runways. It doesn't matter if it's the one emergency flight for the search and rescue aircraft or if it's 50 an hour. We still have to clean the runways. Nicole said earlier that our revenue model was based on a user pay system, meaning that obviously our revenues are directly linked to how many people travel. 95% fewer people traveling, 85% fixed cost. That's not a good formula. Clearly not something that we feel is sustainable in the environment that we see today. Just an aside, I never actually thought I would see a day when there were only 56 people using this facility. But that was the reality that we faced in July. Fortunate with some of the things that have happened, the phase 3 opening that the province put in for Manitoba, which allowed travel to Western Canada without the 14-day quarantine, has been an incredible boost to those kinds of numbers. And I think at the moment we're sitting just around 1,000. Where's Pascal? We're sitting about 1,000 passengers per day, was the numbers that I had last seen. This obviously has given us pause and reason to significantly revise our 2020 forecasts. As I said, we were budgeting for a slight increase in 2020 until March hit. But as you can see, the revenue number was about 142 million in our forecast. That's now been revised to about 75 million. Now, we don't typically provide forward-looking advice. That's not something that we're required to do, but I thought it was important for you to understand what we're looking at the moment. These numbers are clearly subject to change as travel and restrictions shift. But what you can see there is that we've been able to find about a 25% reduction in our costs through some of the things that I mentioned. It has not been easy. It has not been easy on our people. Our EBITDA will see a dramatic decrease from plan. And you can see there we're down to 16.6, which results in a net loss of about 45 million on the current plan. Now, these numbers are based on what we knew as available information the beginning of the summer. We've done a revision even since then that actually shows that perhaps not quite as strong. And the issue we're now seeing globally as we come into September is that the business traffic is just not coming back. So we saw a good bump of people going to visit family or taking small vacations out west. That's a phenomenon that's happening globally. But as we start to see what's happening in September, there's two things, and I'm not sure which they are right now. One is the booking window has come very, very tight. So nobody's booking a flight until they absolutely know they're going, instead of booking 3 weeks in advance. And the other is that more people are just continuing to work from home, and some of that business travel that might have been anticipated is probably just not there. The result, though, is a $32 million gap between what our requirements for, and this is just necessary capital expenditures, interest and principal payments. That gap clearly has consequences, and I'm glad to see some of our finance community here with us today. They've been really good to be working through all this with in the last while. But Nicole mentioned our master trust indenture earlier. There are two measures in there. There's the debt service coverage ratio and gross debt service coverage ratio. I won't go into all the technicalities of that, but there are consequences on there that Nicole mentioned of having to maintain the ratios. So we started 2019 at 1.64, I think it was the number, Nicole. and that ratio has to be maintained at 1. It's going to take some time for the airlines to start adding routes again, especially nonstop routes. That's a function of the hub and spoke process as they start to bring their capacity back up. We're working extremely closely with all the airlines right now, particularly the 2 national carriers, to find that right path forward together. We're a supply chain. Something we do affects them, something they do affects us, something we all do affects the traveler. We're also looking at other innovative ways to do business, to grow our revenue, to broaden our reach through WASCO, further supporting our cargo sector, which kind of has a virtuous, I'll say, cycle to it. The picture you're looking at was actually kind of a unique operation. So when we started some of the work around the pandemic, the first thing that happened was we did a lot of work with the province on and Canada on repatriating people, bringing them home. Then the next thing was, and this flight is all personal protective equipment, flights from around the world coming to Manitoba and finding ways to work together as a supply chain in Manitoba to get that equipment here and to get it here as cost effectively and as quickly as possible. We had a number of our team dedicated to working with the province through that. It worked extremely well. I was pleased with the way that relationship developed and how we were able to help our community save money and get the PPE as quickly as possible. But as we work with cargo carriers, I mentioned that virtuous cycle. It supports the growth of our import and export businesses. It in turn adds to the growth on the passenger side and just continues, adds jobs. It's clear that this airport and this facility are going to be a critical part for our province and for our country's economic recovery. Unfortunately, I don't believe WAA can recover entirely on its own. The Government of Canada continues to encourage people to stay home while refusing to support the very sector that's most impacted by the decisions they've made. Countries around the world are opening up what we call safe travel corridors based on the best medical evidence available and of their understanding of the virus. Yet our government has not moved. We've suggested and continue to advocate that we need to be opening our borders. Now, I'm not saying that we need to instantly open our borders to countries where the case counts are much higher than ours. But where we have similar or less case counts, we should not be restricting travel. We need to be opening the borders and allowing commerce to happen. On August 14th, the federal government launched its flight plan. There was a lot of input, particularly from the top 4 airports in Canada for this flight plan. I found it really interesting that as part of the release, the government made it clear that to date there is no evidence of transmission aboard an aircraft. That tells me that the work that's been going on, whether it's at the airports or at the airlines, with implementing safety protocols, has been working. It also tells me that we don't need some of the restrictions on the sector itself that we currently have. It says to me that the act of travel is actually safe. Just this weekend, I was speaking with someone from the province. There have to be ways of us understanding where the hot spots are and being able to limit it to those while leaving others open that can be. The governments are recognizing the impact of COVID-19 on the aviation industry, and they recognize that the industry needs to be strong to support economic recovery. The federal government approach for financial relief has been to focus on the individuals that are impacted, such as the emergency wage benefit program. They have provided ground rent relief, and I am very thankful for that having been provided. there are 21 rent-paying airports in Canada, and they've provided relief from March through December of this year. Rent, by the way, is based on the number of people traveling, so the revenue. It's a tax directly on revenue. So when our revenues go down, the value of that rent relief sort of kind of went with it. But there is about just over around a $2 million value to us out of that rent relief. Transport Canada has also been really good to work with in providing, I'll say, relief from specific regulations. We appreciate their efforts, and we'll look forward to continue working with them on that. But survival is critical to the future competitiveness. Survival is critical, but future competitiveness will similarly come home to roost. And I just want to end by going through a couple of slides on this. Some countries, as you can see up there, like Singapore, a very different model there. They're really a one-city country. Has put 19.5% of their stimulus funding against aviation. You go down the list, probably, well, New Zealand's on there in part because it's, I'll say, a little more similar comparison to Canada. Australia would be as well. But the United States, which is our closest competitor in many respects, has put 2.4% of their funding into the sector. So what's happened in the United States is really they've put in 3 pieces of funding that go direct to airports as grants. And if you take a look at, there's the HEAL Act, which has not yet passed, which is estimated to put about another $15 billion towards airports in the United States. There's another smaller one was $1.2 billion, and there's the CARES Act, which put about $10 billion towards airports. That's really important for us as we look forward, because what's happening is that what we saw years ago of leakage, people going to Grand Forks to travel to Vegas and various other positions, is something that is at risk for us. If we took, say, Grand Forks just as an example, and assumed that Winnipeg qualified under the same act on a per capita basis, prorated, that would mean, translated to Canadian dollars, this airport would have received $469 million Canadian as a grant from the government. That would go a long ways to sustainability at this facility. Think about it, we have less than 500 million, or less than 600 million in total debt. A grant like that would basically wipe it out and have us competitive. That's clearly not going to happen, but it is something that will impact our futures as the carriers serving Grand Forks continue to get grants. I didn't talk about them, but they've similarly received grants from the federal government in order to maintain service to communities like Grand Forks. So the grant was given to the airline. The condition was they had to continue serving these communities. They'll be looking at some point, once the borders are open, to attract people again from Manitoba. We're going to be in a very difficult competitive position. All of this combined has really, I guess, moved to extend the period of what we've been thinking our recovery would take. As I said, it will make it harder for Canada to compete. Without the government stepping in to support the industry, we will continue to struggle and fall farther behind the rest of the world. It will mean for most airports also something that is dear to my heart, and that's, to this point we've been able to participate with partners in the creation of jobs, in the economic advancement of our community. Once we've blown through, that's a technical financial term, blown through, our cash reserves and used up the availability of credit, it will be a long time before we're able to do things like participate with the federal government on critical infrastructure that meets this community's needs going forward. We'll continue to advocate for support along with our airport partners. And in all of this, I want to say that we're also not going to shy away from the opportunity to rebuild, restructure, and prepare for growth that will come. We're in the boardroom, we're on the airfield, we're in the terminal, interacting with passengers and doing absolutely everything we can to ensure that we are planning to keep this airport as a source of pride for this community. We're going to continue to be leaders in transportation innovation and growth. We'll find meaningful ways to give back to this community. We will keep working diligently to welcome our community to this facility when they're ready to travel, because we're ready for them. This global crisis is unlike anything, certainly, that I could have predicted. But our why remains the same. We're here to serve. We're here to serve this community, and we're working to keep ourselves and others and our community safe. We don't yet know where this is going to end, but we do know it will end, and that our work today is going to get us through this. I am really looking forward to looking into the rearview mirror to see how our work today got us through it. We are going to build a brighter future, and we are going to be here to serve. Thank you. You want to take over?
Thank you, Barry. And at this time, we would open up the floor for any questions that you might have. Unfortunately, we don't have mics in the typical sense, so if you do have a question, I'd ask that you stand up and speak loudly. Tyler, is there any questions? There's no questions on the video? Okay, thank you. All right, well, then, of course, board members, Barry and the team will be here following the conclusion of this meeting. So if you do have some questions and want to speak with someone individually, you most certainly can. And so I would like to thank everybody for participating in today's annual public meeting. You know, your participation and your continued support of the airport is very important, and we look forward to a challenging year ahead, but taking that challenge on with your support. So thank you, everyone, for participating today.